It's 9 o'clock, this is Sky News. Welcome to our new show where I'm going to interview people who have something to say about the world today and how it's changing. They'll be from politics, sport, business, entertainment, public life, or they'll be everyday people caught up in the events of our times. I'll be putting my questions to tonight's special guests. Good evening. However hard we might try, we can't tear our eyes from Ukraine. Towns like Mariupol and Kharkiv, places we barely heard of but weeks ago, are now at the forefront of our minds, being consumed in an onslaught with no end in sight. And it's civilians who are paying the price. International condemnation continues, but can Russian forces be stopped? This man should know. Once an oligarch, then jailed for 10 years in a Siberian prison camp, he's now described by some as President Putin's leading critic in exile. And tonight, he warns that the West have got this badly wrong. England's Premier League is the most successful, the richest and perhaps the most exciting in the world. But has that come at too high a price? The war in Ukraine shone a light on some of the money that's flowed into the game and caused a major crisis at one of the world's most glamorous clubs, Chelsea. I sat down with former England star and just maybe future politician Gary Neville to get his take on the mixing of football and politics. And what is the role of the police in tackling violence against women and girls? If you don't think sexual assault, harassment and worse are a completely normal part of life in this country, ask a woman how she feels. Last year, a senior policewoman was appointed to tackle this epidemic. And tonight, Maggie Blyth is on the show in her first TV interview since her appointment. No doubt her heart's in the right place, but is the police's. The threat of violence against women and girls is a huge daily fear for millions of British women. It rose to the fore last year with some high-profile cases, like the murder of Sarah Everard, but it remains a fact of life week after week. How can we explain, then, that rape cases are at record highs and convictions at record lows? Let's speak now to the person appointed to tackle that issue, Deputy Chief Constable Maggie Blyth, the first national lead for violence against women and girls in the police force. Maggie, thanks so much for coming on the show tonight. This is something that I care a lot about, and I know lots of women do. Let's talk first about the scale of this problem. Rape cases are at record highs, over 60,000 cases reported to the police in the year to September 2021, convictions at record lows, an estimated 1.6 million women, the victims of domestic abuse, 680,000 women victims of sexual assault, 110 women killed in the UK by men in 2020. Can you, in good faith, tell women watching this interview, watching us talk, that if they suffer violence or abuse and go to the police, that they'll get justice in this country?
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me along this evening. Yes, in answer to your question, I do think that women should and must feel confident in reporting offences relating to sexual assault, domestic abuse to the police, because we are absolutely determined to address what you've just described as an epidemic, and we know that, and we want to prioritise changing how we work within policing and how we address the challenges that we know we've got ahead.
Maggie, I guess part of the argument has been that the police could be part of the problem, not the solution. And there's a number of reasons I say that, but one reason is when I interviewed the Prime Minister about this back in October at a Conservative Party conference, I asked him about the appalling statistics around rape prosecutions, and he said to me, people don't have enough confidence in the criminal justice system and they don't have a feeling that the police are handling these issues fast enough, which has led to this feeling of fury and frustration. So he kind of put it back on the criminal justice system, but also on the police. How do you feel about that when you hear him say that? Do you share some of the blame, or do you think he's shifting the blame?
I'm listening to what women and girls say to me every day at the moment, and I think that trust and confidence issue is absolutely right. And policing knows that we've lost the trust and confidence of many communities, particularly women and girls across our country. And that's something that really concerns us. And we know, particularly in the last few months, and some of the events, some of the tragic deaths of women last year have really, really changed how some communities, particularly women and girls, feel about policing. So, yes, we hear that trust and confidence issue.
And Maggie, I mean, one of the good news is that you've been appointed the lead in the police to actually tackle this across police forces. So Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, said to me that she wanted to make it a national priority, and she's put you in place, which means it has become a national priority, which is a positive thing. But I guess the thing is that what follows through from that, and one of the questions I had for you is that does your appointment, does the fact the government's making this a national priority mean that in practice the government now might hit these rate review targets that they set? And that was to get to nearly over 5,000 prosecutions and nearly 3,000 convictions by 2024. That's going back to 2016. You'll know all of this. Levels. Last year, prosecutions were at 1,500, just to put it in some context. Can you give the commitment today now that you think, with you at the lead and this prioritisation, that the government can hit those targets and women can have confidence by 2024 the government will hit those targets?
What I can talk about is I'm absolutely committed to ensuring that the things that need to change do change within policing, but we also know that we have to work with other sectors, with a range of other different organisations, including the CPS, if we're really going to make a difference for the criminal justice system as a whole. So I'm ambitious for change, and I know that we have a plan and will make some significant changes over the next year, 2 years moving forward. But we're talking long term. So in terms of really changing.
They're not realistic, are they, those targets?
In terms of really changing the attitudes of men and boys towards women and girls is going to take time. That isn't going to just happen overnight, that we're going to see increased
And Maggie, I do want to come to that, but they're not realistic targets, are they? I mean, let's be straight.
I think we have to have targets for improving both charges and prosecutions around rape and serious sexual offences and domestic abuse. We have to have those targets, and the CPS and the police are working together around them. But we also have to be realistic that the criminal justice system alone, and particularly on the back of a pandemic, where we know we've got the backlogs in the courts we have, is going to take time to bring those changes. And until we address the trust and confidence, which you introduced at the beginning, I think we've got some difficulties ahead.
Just to be clear then, the targets are important, but the time frame might not be hit. Is that fair?
I think the time frame, it's going to take years to really change our criminal justice system.
Okay, so not hit
being
by,
realistic.
Not hit by 2024, which I think is a fair and straight answer. Let's talk about the police and your role. The Everard case devastated women's confidence in the police, and that was compounded by the policing of the vigil at Clapham Common. There were the WhatsApp messages about rape and violence and domestic violence from the Charing Cross police station. And then this week, there was the strip searching of a young black girl, Child Q, at her own school, which has really upset people. It's a problem, isn't it?
The incidents and the cases and the particular matter around Child Q are really disturbing and are shocking, shock me and shock the people that I work with. And I think even more reason why we need to have a plan and a priority around tackling violence against women and girls. It's on the level of an epidemic in terms of the information and the data that we have. You outlined at the beginning. We know what the problem is. So we know that it's an issue for society, and therefore what we see in society, we will also see in policing. But we also know that this is something that we have to keep shining the light on. And the more that we do, I think the more cases we're going to see coming to light around our own workforce, around police officers and staff, behaving in a way that falls below the standard that we would expect within policing. And we will root that out, and already are on the way to do that through the plans that we have.
Because Maggie, actually, now you bring it up, I mean, dozens of male police officers are continuing to exploit their position and take sexual advantage of women. 66 officers and members of the police, you'll know this, face disciplinary proceedings for alleged abuse of position for a sexual purpose. Have you witnessed any of these attitudes among your colleagues?
So,
personally?
First of all, just to go back, there is an absolute plan to root out any behaviour or conduct that falls below what we would expect in policing. And the many officers and staff that I work with and I have led over the last few years want that. We don't want people in policing that bring down the reputation of policing and don't fit with the ethics and values we hold as so important. So really important to know that there's that plan. In terms of what I see, yes, I experience and see what women tell me they've faced within policing and in other professions working alongside policing. And it's really important that we have a culture where those things are talked about amongst our teams and our supervisors, and women can come forward.
So even being a senior police officer, you've personally experienced sexism and...
I have been really supported in my career through policing, and I wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be doing the job I'm doing if I didn't feel that policing is a fantastic career and something to enjoy and be part of. That's really important, I think, to get across. I want women to come and join policing. I'm really pleased that we've got about 42% in our latest round coming to join policing. But yes, I've seen sexism, and I know that misogyny exists in police forces and the police service as a whole, and really important that we tackle that. It exists because it exists in society, but I think there also is perhaps something about being attracted to power, being attracted to a culture that some, largely men, may find attractive and want to come into, because of the ability to coerce and abuse more people that are more vulnerable. So I think there's always that possibility, which we see in other professions as well. And our vetting and our culture has to be one where, in teams, people can have those conversations and call out and feel that they will be listened to if they feel something's inappropriate.
So you feel the more women in the police force, the more that dilutes that culture, that male culture?
I think it does. It absolutely dilutes it, but also diversity. And having men, as we do have, who want to be very strong allies for calling out inappropriate culture and being part of that change.
Just one quick question on the most prominent policewoman in the country, Cressida Dick. Did you think she was treated unfairly, or was it understandable she had to go? How did you feel about that as a fellow senior policewoman? The
Met Commissioner is a fantastic role model for women in policing. Her resignation really is a matter for the Mayor of London and the Home Secretary, so I wouldn't comment. But a great role model for women in policing.
So you found her inspiring?
Absolutely,
she inspired you.
absolutely.
Let's just tackle another problem. I'm actually running out of time. I've got so many questions. You talked about male culture in the police, but is the real problem with violence against women and girls male culture in our society? Has it got worse, or are we getting more vocal about not putting up with it?
I think very much the latter. I've in a working career of over 30 years, and I've seen changes in that working career around our society. But there are attitudes we know still prevail, and I think a tipping point, which I have referred to, others have referred to as a watershed moment of last year, coming out of the pandemic, the spotlight that's been shone on what happens behind closed doors and sometimes in public places to women and girls, and the Everyone's Invited website that's set up by girls and young women, accounting for the things that have happened to them. I think women and girls are saying enough. We don't want to be treated like this. We don't have to have and put up with that type of behaviour. And that is a moment in time for me in my career, for me as a woman in society. And I think we need to grab that moment and to use what we know with that information you started out with this morning, the epidemic in front of us. We need to be able to address it. But policing has to do that by working with other agencies, with education, with the rest of the criminal justice system, with health, because ultimately this is, I think, a public health issue around violence.
And Maggie, obviously, focus of forces help. People speaking about it helps. But in practical terms, what would help you in terms of policing? Would it help, for example, if misogyny became a hate crime? Would it help if public sexual harassment became a specific offence?
I want to keep the spotlight on violence against women and girls. I want there to be lasting change for how women and girls feel safe in our society. I want women and girls to trust policing, and the plan we have, I think, will go a long way to that. But I think it's a complex one. Misogyny is a hate crime. The government has accepted the Law Commission advice that it won't be included as a hate crime, and policing enforces the laws. We don't make it. I think it's perhaps a very symbolic gesture to have done to make misogyny a hate crime, but perhaps doesn't really get to the root of the problem. That
what about sexual harassment, though?
Well, I think the root of the problem is behaviour and attitudes of boys and men. We've got lots of offences already, and we know that consistently we don't use them as well as we should across our 43 police forces. We don't use some of the protective orders that we've got to keep women and girls safe well enough. So let's get working on that. And let's get looking at the education and the changing attitudes of boys and men before we think we need more laws. Because I think prevention and education and tackling attitudes isn't necessarily about creating new legislation. So I'm not entirely convinced, but we will work with government as they look into whether new laws are needed around street-based harassment. And we will want to recognise that there are additional pressures in the 21st century online that might mean new legislation is needed. Well,
we are going to get the online harms bill. So, well, look, Maggie, I would like to carry on, but I've got to wrap that. But thank you for coming on, and I hope you'll come back again in a few months' time and we could look at some of the stats and see if we're going the right way or the wrong way. Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome back. We're going to have an interview with Mikhail Khodorkovsky soon, but first, has English football sold its soul? Did it ever have one? Russia's invasion of Ukraine prompted the West to sanction individuals and businesses alleged to have connection with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Among those to have their assets frozen is Roman Abramovich, owner of the Chelsea Football Club. And Chelsea isn't the only top club to be accused of being funded from morally compromised sources. It's a challenge to those thousands of football fans who have faith in the beautiful game, who see in it lyricism and humanity. People like, for example, Gary Neville, once a star of Manchester United in England, now a respected pundit and businessman. Right, ready? You feeling the pressure?
Yeah, a little bit.
Right, ready?
That was some strike, that.
What did you think? Yeah. Gary, thanks for coming on my show. I'm really, really happy to have you on my show. Can you tell?
Yeah, I'm happy to be on here,
I'm really happy. This is...
Congratulations on... did you win this show?
I won it. We had a penalty strikeout and I was victorious, yeah. Anyway, look, thanks for coming on. We actually are in football goals, but I will talk to you a bit about football, but I also want to talk to you a bit about your career and also about politics, because you are quite politically engaged. And I've noticed it because we've interacted a bit on Twitter and you're quite into politics and you're really clued up on what's going on. But I wanted to start and just ask you about Ukraine, because people on both the left and right have spoken about how Ukraine's provided a moment of clarity about a reminder, if you like, of what our fundamental values are. Have you felt that as well?
I think so. I think one of the reasons over the last 4 or 5 years that I've probably become more politically engaged has been because of the weak leadership, not just in this country, my disappointment in the leadership in this country, but also internationally. Obviously Brexit and the fact that we've been separated from our European friends, our neighbours, people who we respect and love us, who we should have a strong relationship with, and also the US, obviously the Trump administration, which again was, in my mind, farcical. And so what we've seen is basically over the last 4 or 5 years, a weaker West that's, I think, been exploited in the last few weeks, and the Ukrainian people suffer for it. Out of the Ukrainian suffering comes a strengthened West where people, we've recognised that actually we are on the same side, that we should work together, we need to collaborate, we need to make sure that we unify, and but it shouldn't need what's happening in Ukraine at the moment for that to happen.
But there's always been that sort of old cliche about sports and politics not mixing. It seems a bit hollow now, doesn't it? Because the two things have completely bled into each other, haven't they, in recent days over Ukraine and the sanctions and also kind of what's happened in terms of sporting events and Russia being excluded?
I think I've always felt that sport should rise above politics and even international crises that happen. However, I think I'm wrong. I've always welcomed international money into Premier League football. Yeah. I've always felt that we should welcome the Saudi Arabian money, the UAE money, the Russian money, and that we should try and, through football and through sport, create what would be a better collaborative working relationship, improve conditions for the populations of these countries, which in large part they do suffer, and they don't always have the freedom and the democracies that we and the choices that we have. However, I have to say that's been tested enormously in this last few weeks with what's happened with Chelsea, with Abramovich, with the Ukraine war, the connections between Abramovich and Putin. Yeah. Government have obviously closed Chelsea down effectively at this moment in time, other than the fact they can play football matches. My long-held view that football and sport should try and welcome this international money in, I feel a lot weaker on that opinion today.
I was going to ask you about that, Gary, actually, because on March the 1st, I had a look, you did an FT, Financial Times Football Summit, and you said you wouldn't have kicked Abramovich out of English football, and you actually said he broke the old elite because he brought new money in and he broke the kind of top tier and he kind of got and sort of Chelsea in. That was on March the 1st. It's what, now March the 17th. Do you, even now, do you think actually you misjudged that or you've changed your view? I
think what I was saying in that particular interview is I welcome the competitive nature, the competitive change in English football. The idea of Manchester United, Arsenal and Liverpool being the traditional elite, always being at the top, always having the most money. I like the idea of the fact that they've been challenged by Manchester City, Newcastle now, obviously Blackburn historically with Jack Walker, who was a local businessman, and obviously Roman Abramovich's Chelsea. I believe they've added to the Premier League's global appeal, the competitive landscape of the game in this country, the quality of the football that we see, but at what cost? At what cost? And I have to say I've always welcomed it. I welcome international investment into cities, but then I think the line has been crossed, and it's obviously been crossed in the last few weeks.
So you sort of see it as a moment of reckoning for English football now?
Absolutely a moment of reckoning. I don't think the Premier League can continue to bury their heads in the sand and feel as though, I mean, at the moment, we don't even know where the Premier League stand on these big issues at times. They waited for the government to act before they suspended Roman Abramovich as a director. He'd almost already had the club taken off him at that point. Yeah. The Premier League, it's chasing them down the street. The issues around independence, transparency, fit and proper owners tests, redistribution of funds, looking after grassroots football, they can continue to ignore it, but it's coming for them. And I think this crisis in the last few weeks has made it incredibly difficult for them to ignore that there's got to be a better way forward. You know, you're talking about some of the richest businessmen in the world, states in the world, now not owning English football clubs, which I say it's made it such a competitive game, it's made it a brilliant game, but it's been basically it's happening without control, without independence and without transparency. And our game in this country is far too important for deals to be done. We still don't know how Saudi Arabia were accepted into this country as a football club owner. We have no idea. We know that they're in. We know that they met the criteria, but no one knows what the criteria is.
And you would have seen yesterday that the Chelsea boss, Thomas Tuchel, made that point. Why is it right for Chelsea to be punished over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but Newcastle have not been punished given that Saudi Arabia are involved in a war in Yemen? I mean, there is a contradiction there, isn't there?
You're absolutely right, and I say I'm happy to say that I've been wrong on this particular issue. I think it's taken the Ukraine war for me to recognise that we cannot accept money into football in this country that is tainted. And there's no doubt that we have done.
So, Gary, following on from that, do you think that it should be right that the Premier League asks owners to sign declarations supporting human rights, or there's an independent regulator that checks these things before people are allowed to buy clubs? Like, there should be more regulation of the sector now?
Well, 100%. I've been calling for an independent regulator for 2 or 3 years, and that has to come in. That has to be a priority, because there is a crisis in English football every 10 minutes. You know, whether it be Derby County, whether it be the Super League project, whether it be Abramovich in the last few weeks, there is no way that the Premier League have proven that they're not fit and proper and they're not capable of demonstrating the leadership that's needed in English football. So that will change. I think just generally, this is a wake-up call, I think, for all football clubs, associations, organisations, that we can't just separate ourselves from the political and social issues that are surrounding us. We are intertwined in it because of the ownership structures that exist in English football at this moment in time.
Well, look, Gary, let's come on to talking about you and your sort of interaction between football and politics, and also just all your business interests. So let's kick off with, you know, I've been reading a lot about you. The two things that have really struck me is you're very busy and you're very driven.
Generally,
you're a TV expert, you're a social media influencer, you own hotels, you're a restaurateur, you're a football club owner, you set up a university, you've just joined the Labour Party, and you get up at 4:30 a.m. and your motto is attack the day. There's this relentlessness about you. I mean, for a start, how do your family cope with it?
They don't really. They ignore me at times and just let me get on with it. Actually, it's the name of my business, Relentless. It's my favourite word in the world because I don't think it does stop. I think that you have an opportunity in life. You're here for a very short period of time. I think you go for it. You attack the day. You make every moment count. I wasn't born like that. It's my parents, my upbringing, my coaches, my manager at Manchester United, surrounded by brilliant people who set the right example. And we have two choices when we wake up every single day. We're either going to go for it and try our very best and not give in, or the opposite of that. And for me, there's only one way to go. You have you set up a university. You have a business. I mean, you manage 600 people. I mean, you're a serious businessman aside from all of your other interests around football. But you have said that when you're 50, which is in 3 years' time, it's the next phase of your life. It seems to me, from observing you a bit, it's a question of if not when you get into politics. Is that fair? I don't think so. I mean, I joined the Labour Party. I wanted to. I felt compelled to. Why
did you feel compelled to?
Real disappointment with the existing government. We have to be better than that. We have to be better than that. And I think in the last 2 or 3 weeks, it's absolutely right that, you know, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, the SNP, people who comment on sort of what will be political situations have backed off, because it's important that we have unity at this moment in time, that we concentrate and focus on what's needed in Ukraine and support those people and not, if you like, let politics get in the way of it. However, the baton has just been placed on the floor. It needs picking up again.
Do you think that the Conservative Party should have a policy now that they don't accept any money from Russian donors unless it's someone that's opposed to the Putin regime?
I mean, they've laundered the money through this city for the last 10 years. They've poisoned people on our streets. They've invested into our current serving government party. I'd suggest that that's something that doesn't need to be said. I mean, we need to be very light on this at this moment in time, because it takes away from the focus of making sure that Boris Johnson, who, to be fair, doesn't need much to distract him, but at this moment in time he needs to focus wholly on Ukraine and making sure he makes the right decisions. That's why I'm leaving off him. That's why.
So you don't think he should resign at the moment?
At this moment in time, I would say that ultimately there needs to be a focus completely on him doing his job, which is supporting the British government in making sure that everything that needs to happen in Ukraine happens. However, the second that hopefully this crisis is over or it subsides, he needs to leave, because he is a danger to our country. The standards that, you know, we have got zero credibility in Europe and around the world. We need a government who can rebuild our relationships and our standards.
Gary, I mean, just to be clear, the government would contest that, but
of course they would.
Just to be clear though, I mean, you're so sort of, you have this but you have a very visceral dislike for Boris Johnson, but you also have this very public role as a kind of leading footballing star and commentator. Do you ever get blowback from fans that don't like it? Because millions of people voted for Boris Johnson.
Of course I do.
And they don't like you talking about this.
Absolutely, and I've got they're smart operators. I've no doubt that when they say get Brexit done and when they say get levelling up, it's hitting home, because they've got data behind them to support it. They socially engineer our minds. We've got to get back to what's important in this country. I accept millions of people have voted for him. I'm hopeful that Brexit was a big part of that, and that ultimately the also weakness of the opposition. But I'd like to think in 2 years' time that we have a better place to go to in terms of leaders. I'm
going to ask you two more things. So one, just going back to politics, I want to pin you down a bit. What about running education for the government? under a Labour government, cabinet minister?
Do you know something? I'm really passionate about education.
I know, you set up a university.
I'm really passionate about education because I do believe it should be the heart. Health and education should be the heart of every government policy.
So you would maybe want to be an MP and a cabinet minister and actually...
I love the idea of having an influence in education and set up a university. You know, when I see 2 weeks ago that this current government have gone out to consultation to remove student loans from students who don't achieve a C at GCSE level in English and maths, it breaks my heart. 20 to 25% of students in this country currently go to university without an English and maths level C at GCSE level.
Yeah.
Subjects like PE, sports science, subjects like, you know, in the digital sector where many of the current jobs exist, you would be excluding people from disadvantaged backgrounds, low-income families, because that's it. They are not ordinarily the students who don't have that. We've got to change the way in which we look at education in this country. So it seems
to me that you don't want to do the mayoral race, but what I'm hearing is someone that does want to dedicate their life even more to public service, because you've done a lot already.
But that doesn't necessarily have to be through being an MP or necessarily through sort of being in public office, because I do like the idea of my freedom. I like the idea of what I do in Manchester with regards to the business.
But you definitely seem attracted to it.
Do you know something? I want to have a positive impact on the people that I'm sort of come into contact with. I really feel passionate about the opportunity that I was given as an 18-year-old by a great manager who looked at me equally as one of the experienced players in the team. And I think that everybody in this country...
You were a leader, you led the youth team, you captained Man U, you can't help it. It's kind of in you, isn't it? It seems to me like it is.
Look, I want everyone to have the best opportunity that they can. You know, it sounds really sort of twee, but the fact of the matter is, I'm really struggling with look at the Chancellor, Beth.
Yeah.
He's worth £500 million. He wakes up one morning and he says, I'm going to lend people in this country who are desperately trying to afford their energy bills £200. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to make them pay me back over 5 years at £40 a year. I don't want that type of guy.
But the only way you change it is if you go into politics, Gary.
I know, but that's honestly, I think sometimes I can have more influence with my Twitter following now than I can.
You have got 5 million followers.
I'd probably have to be quiet if I went into and being an MP. But that guy there has made that decision.
I'm definitely taken away from this interview that you're not ruling it out.
I'm not ruling it out, but I'm also definitely not ruling it in.
Yeah.
But I do see some decisions that are made. We have MPs at this moment in time who vote for children in the first wave of a pandemic not to eat food. That really disturbs me.
OK, I'm going to ask you one final question. Who would you rather work for, Liverpool Football Club or the Conservative Party?
Oh, my goodness gracious.
Oh, he's fallen off the chair.
Oh, do you know something? I have to say, 100% Liverpool Football Club. And do you know something? You know how much I don't like them.
That's why I asked you.
I look at Jurgen Klopp, Jordan Henderson, they're the two leaders in that club at this moment in time on the football pitch and off the football pitch. They're good men, they're good people, they're honest. Let's start with that, shall we, as the basic sort of fundamentals of a leader in this country, and move away from what would be the sort of shenanigans and shambles that we've had for this last 6 months.
All right, well, Gary Neville, I suspect I'll be seeing you down in Westminster in a few years.
You just got your headline, Gary Neville wants to join Liverpool.
Well, you see what I did there. All right, thanks so much for coming on the show. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you. Welcome back. What's in the mind of Vladimir Putin? To help answer that question, I've spoken to one of his oldest adversaries. Mikhail Khodorkovsky was a billionaire oil boss and a supporter of democratic reforms in Russia, but he lost both his money and his freedom when he was sent to jail, reportedly at the orders of Putin. Now, from London, he leads Open Russia, a global network supporting Russian opposition groups. Mr. Khodorkovsky, thank you for talking to us today. There's so much to talk about. Your group, Open Russia, keeps closely in touch with the mood of Russia. What is going on? Because people are afraid to pick a side because of what will happen to them. I mean, you were imprisoned for how long? A decade? So what's going on in Russia now?
В России сейчас военная истерия. До сознания людей очень трудно пробиться. Очень хорошие в прошлом люди говорят когда у них спрашиваешь, говорят, это не мы. Это не мы такого делать не можем. Это либо это фейк, либо это делают на самом деле украинцы, а делают вид, что это мы. И это самые хорошие люди. А некоторые другие говорят, что правильно, надо было наказать. В конце концов, Украина должна принадлежать России. Я не понимаю, как это вот повернулось в общественном сознании вот так вот по щелчку. Я не понимаю. Конечно, есть и другие люди, их много, их приблизительно половина тех, кто открыто или тихо, но выступают против агрессии. Собственно, с этими людьми мы ведем диалог. Эти люди выходят на улицы городов, эти люди пытаются саботировать то, что происходит. Я убежден, что осознание того, что происходит в Украине, оно придет россиянам.
Are you angry that some of the oligarchs that have been sanctioned by the US, the UK, the European Union, that people will not speak out, leading figures in Russian society, very few of them will speak out? Does that make you angry, or is that what you expected?
Я ожидал, что они не очень смелые люди, корыстные люди, для которых их собственное богатство окажется важнее тысяч человеческих жизней, но на некоторых из них я надеялся. И, конечно, меня расстраивает то, что они сегодня вот так вот себя ведут. Вы понимаете, некоторые из них родом сами с Украины. Как ты можешь, когда твой народ бомбят, как ты можешь не занять четкую позицию? Я этого до конца не понимаю и, наверное, никогда не пойму, но я это принял. Окей, значит, мы враги.
Let's come to why they might not do it and to President Putin. You've known him for decades. You were his ally once you supported him. You fought him. You were incarcerated by him. He effectively expelled you from the country that you would love to live in. How do you feel about him now? Do you hate him? Do you fear him?
Я воюю с Путиным уже почти 20 лет. И я думал, что я знаю те пределы, до которых он может дойти. Сегодня это настоящий фашист. Вот просто без всяких преувеличений, без всяких ругательств. Вот он просто фашист, русский фашист. И да, сейчас я Путина ненавижу. Этого не было раньше, даже когда я сидел в тюрьме.
You say Putin is a war criminal. You say he's a fascist. Has he changed since you first knew him?
Сейчас с ним случилось то, что достаточно часто происходит с престарелыми бандитами. Им надо как-то себе объяснить свою жизнь. И он увидел миссию. Даже обретя миссию и став по-настоящему фашистом, то есть тем человеком, который ставит миссию гораздо выше, чем любое количество человеческих жизней, он, тем не менее, остался бандитом. А для бандита существует весьма конкретное, специфическое отношение к тем людям, с которыми он взаимодействует. Бандит не готов договариваться в режиме «у вас это, у меня это, и давайте не трогать друг друга». Бандит считает, что если вы идете ему навстречу, не продемонстрировав перед этим силу, то это значит, вы его боитесь. Если вы его боитесь, он должен вас дожать. Если вы опять идете ему навстречу, не продемонстрировав силу, то значит вы опять слабы, и вас можно еще дожать. И это до тех пор, пока вы не станете буквально рабом. Чтобы мы понимали, остановки для него тогда не будет. Вот это та опасность, которая на сегодняшний день существует в переговорах западных лидеров, таких как Макрон, Беннет, Байден с Путиным. Они, не продемонстрировав силу, пытаются его уговорить. А это значит, в его голове они демонстрируют слабость. Это значит, их можно дожимать. Это может привести к той самой мировой войне.
What, if you were NATO, would you do? Would you implement the no-fly zone? Would you actually recommend that those powers go into conflict with Putin, knowing that that could lead to nuclear escalation? I would argue that they're in a very difficult situation, and it must be very difficult to take that decision.
Проблема в том, что западные лидеры все время отстают на шаг или на два. В тот момент, когда Путин аннексировал Крым, его можно было реально остановить и продемонстрировать ему силу настоящими санкциями. Вместо этого его предпочли погладить по головке. Когда он атаковал Украину, когда стало понятно, что он будет атаковать Украину, его можно было остановить, реально снабдив Украину оружием. Тем не менее, предпочли сделать это так, чуть-чуть. Когда он уже атаковал Украину, можно было его остановить, и еще пока можно его остановить, введя бесполетную зону. Потому что тем самым ликвидируется базовое преимущество, которое имеет Путин перед украинскими вооруженными силами, перед украинским народом. Это возможность безнаказанно их бомбить и обстреливать ракетами с тех точек, куда им нет ухода. Если этот момент будет опять пропущен, следующий момент будет уже переход границы. Переход границы с Польшей, переход границы с Прибалтикой. Он считает, что НАТО не существует. Он сейчас в этом убеждается. Это ключевая ошибка Запада и западных лидеров. Вы давно не имели дела с бандитами. Вам все время кажется, что вы можете бандиту что-то такое дать, не продемонстрировав силу, что он успокоится. Вы чем-то его можете утихомирить. Да почитайте вы историю своих собственных стран. Вы это все проходили в 1938-1939 году. Вот вы точно так же пытались Гитлеру что-нибудь дать, чтобы он успокоился. И это привело к мировой войне. Хотя в 1938-м его можно было остановить вообще без никаких проблем. Вы не переживайте. Путин сумеет рассказать русскому народу, что он победил, но сам он должен понять, что он проиграл.
I wasn't going to ask you this, but I am actually going to ask you this. You talked about Putin being a fascist. You've also just referenced the beginning of the Second World War in 1938 to 1939. Are you saying that you think that President Putin resembles in some way Hitler?
Без всякого сомнения, да. Мы имеем дело с Гитлером, да, пока без истории с геноцидом, без истории с Холокостом. Но он стоит на пороге этого. Геноцид будет.
Your message, it seems to me, to Western leaders is crystal clear today. Do you think then, defeating Putin, there is inevitability that nuclear weapons could be used? Because that's what the West fears, right? That's what we fear.
Путин использует ядерное оружие только в том случае, если будет уверен, что он не получит ответ. Вот он будет уверен, что за Украину никто не вступится. Он может применить ядерное оружие в Украине. Потом он себя убедит, что за Польшу никто не вступится. Он будет готов применить ядерное оружие против Польши. Если у него будет четкое понимание, что ответом на применение ядерного оружия будет его безусловная смерть, он не самоубийца. Был бы он самоубийцей, он бы не прятался за 3 кольцами охраны и не отсаживался бы на другой конец стола даже от своих приближенных.
I mean, you clearly think the West are following the wrong strategy, and you know the man well. I want to ask you about your future now, just about you. Litvinenko, Salisbury, other reputed attacks on individuals in Britain. Putin gave a televised address yesterday in which he talked about scum traitors as being midges we spit out. They were his words. You sit here and you say he's a fascist, that he's like Hitler. I can see the contempt, actually the rage you feel towards him. Do you ever feel fear for your life or feel scared about speaking out?
Я читал слушал то, что он вчера говорил. Он использовал слово «национал-предатели». Очень интересно, что ввел это слово в оборот Гитлер.
But you're not scared?
Это то, что я пытаюсь сказать западным людям. Если вы будете говорить: ой, он использует ядерное оружие, и мы все умрем, давайте ему уступим здесь, давайте ему уступим дальше, давайте ему уступим еще дальше. Это значит, что вы будете уступать ему до той поры, что вы станете просто рабами. Я этого для себя не признаю. Я себе говорю: да, ты можешь меня убить, но я все равно когда-то умру. Значит, пока я жив, и я буду жить с честью, так как я считаю правильным. А если ты меня убьешь, ну что поделать? Чем я лучше всех остальных, кто умер до меня и умрет после меня? Нельзя отступать под угрозой. Нельзя. Иначе жизнь будет очень грязной.
Okay, well, Mikhail, thank you so much. If I could say thank you in Russian, I would. How do you say? Spasiba.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mikhail Khodorkovsky there, with his view, a warning that Putin will never stop, in his view, unless Western leaders use direct military force. That's his view. Thanks for joining us.